Welcome everyone. I'm sorry I have totally boomer teched everything with the intro song. So, yeah. That's how it goes when you're in a bit of a hurry when you start a show. Yeah. So I will just jump into our very little excerpt we had going to introduce the stream.
The Phoenix on the Sword by Robert E. Howard. Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of. When shining kingdoms lay spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars. Numidia, Ophir, Brithunia, Hyperborea, Zamora with its dark-haired women and towers of spider-haunted mystery, Zingara with its chivalry, Koth that bordered on the pastoral lands of Shem, Stygia with its shadow-guarded tombs, Hyrcania whose riders wore steel and silk and gold. But the proudest kingdom of the world was Aquilonia, reigning supreme in the dreaming west. Hither came Conan, the Cimmerian, black-haired, sullen-eyed, sword in hand, a thief, a reaver, a slayer, with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth, to tread the jeweled thrones of the earth under his sandaled feet.
So yeah, it's a good thing we had Dave come to rescue this little woman with his epic reading there. Thank you very much for that one. And welcome to the show.
My pleasure. I love the music. That was so awesome.
Yeah, it really fit
it
well.
had to be, didn't it?
Yeah.
Conan theme. Yeah, and that is an epic opening passage there from Robert E. Howard, and just capturing the essence of the sort of epic heroism that he's known for. Just for anybody who does not know, my name's Katrina.
And I'm Lynx.
Yep. And this is Half of Europa. Welcome to anyone who might be new. Today we have with us as a guest Dave Martel of the Bog, whose voice you just heard there, reading Conan the Barbarian, beginning of Phoenix, the Sword of the Phoenix, wasn't it?
Phoenix on the Sword.
Phoenix on the Sword. You know, I had Phoenix on the Sword. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is totally epic reading there. Do agree.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we are delighted to have you here for our chat on Pulp Fiction, which
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
yeah, definitely an interesting topic. As I have mentioned before, I'm quite an avid reader, though I haven't really focused much on particular genres or anything. I basically mostly read just to relax. But I have come across some of the titles over the years, but I'm definitely very excited to dive into this topic and learn so much more. So, yeah, welcome.
I mean, Pulp Fiction is something that I have come to relatively sort of later on. Really, it's been the issue of the Archives, and then started looking into it a bit more. And particularly before this stream, I've just been like binge listing Lovecraft and Howard. So super addictive, actually.
Big time.
I find it.
Yeah, I've had a Lovecraftian week, basically just binging stories on YouTube. And I think I had somewhat of a brain meltdown by the weekend or something, because his stories are bizarre.
They truly are. They truly
Were
are.
you driven near insane by horrors that you could not possibly hope to comprehend?
I
Oh,
love
Their
yeah.
non-Euclidean geometry was terrifying to you.
Yeah, the fog came creeping in, and the voices and mysterious
Oh, no.
tombs showing up in my bookshelves, and yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
terrible. Hate it when that happens.
Yeah,
It's the weird shapes that make your brain funny.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And just
But
for a bit
yeah.
of housekeeping, thank you, Yankee Apple, for the diamond. And we also have the Paradox in chat. And yes, I might not technically be a boomer, but I sometimes boomer tech a bit. And Jack White, good to see you. Punished Wagner as well.
So yeah, we are mainly going to be talking today probably about Lovecraft and Howard. I would expect, being the two greatest writers of Pulp Fiction there are.
Mhm.
Really, the two who've Lovecraft especially sort of been actually properly inducted into the literary canon.
Yeah.
People actually tend to take Lovecraft quite seriously these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both of these guys who are actually during the days of pulp weren't really that well appreciated. They didn't become the giants that we know them today until well after their deaths, unfortunately. During their time, they had like a cult following, and the people that liked them really liked them, being the readers of Weird Tales magazine. Weird Tales was kind of a really visionary work for the time. It came out in the early 1920s and went through. I think it still technically exists, but it kind of went out of print, went out of favor in probably the late 40s, early 50s, something like that, when all pulp kind of went out of favor. But and it didn't really it never really went away. It just kind of changed form, and it wasn't really the style or the genres that got knocked off. It was kind of just a mode of printing, which the technology used to print pulp, which was effectively before the 60s. It was exactly what it is. Pulp magazines were made of cheap wood pulp paper. They were very inexpensive magazines that were made for the working class. They had like little ads and stuff in them. And so I have quite a few um, reprints of these old pulp magazines, and they had like it's really crazy to go back and see some of these ads that are in there. Like one of them is like, get a job in the new exciting field of electricity. And like, this is how old these writings were. Electricity was a new thing, and they're advertising. You could rent a week in a hotel in Manhattan for only $5, and like stuff like things that are just unfathomable to us in 2021 are in these documents, but they're really, really cool to crack open and read. But going back to Lovecraft and Howard, these
Yeah.
guys were not really, like I said, that well received. They weren't like they weren't the big guys of pulp back in their lifetime when they were writing. The big guys of pulp before them were, guys like L. Ron Hubbard, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs. These were the guys that were bringing in the big sales, right? And to give people an idea of how big the pulp magazine was for people in the 20s and 30s, this was the primary thing for people to read back then. You would go to a like a stand or what we would understand to be like a convenience store, and the entire shelf where you see magazines and everything. Now, I don't even know if they sell magazines anymore, but for those of you that remember magazines, that entire shelf was filled with pulp magazines. That's what everybody read. Everybody read them. And because the overwhelming majority of people at this time were working class, because this is before the kind of explosion of the middle class, and this is during the time of the First World War. This is the time leading up to World War II. This is the time of the Great Depression in America, the Industrial Revolution in Britain, so on and so forth. So people uh, they didn't really have a lot of money, right? These were people that stood in bread lines. These were people that worked uh, ridiculous hours before there was labor laws, right? This is before unions really became a thing. This is back when child labor laws didn't exist, so kids worked in factories. We're talking 6, 7, 8, 9 years old kids going and working in factories as young as 6. You imagine that? That was the reality that they had. So these pulp magazines, Pulp Fiction, was an extremely important part of their popular culture. And I maintain today that Pulp Fiction or weird fiction, which is what Weird Tales magazine and the like kind of brought about, are a contemporary form of folk art that goes all the way back
Mm.
to the storytelling traditions of the ancient time with Beowulf and King Arthur and Odysseus and so on and so forth.
Well, um, that is certainly a very interesting hypothesis about them. I mean, from my perspective, reading a lot of the folk tales and stuff, um, pulp definitely has similarities to them in terms of archetypes
Yeah.
that crop up, and it definitely has the same sort of lack of any moral ambiguity. There is a clear evil force and a good force,
Mhm.
usually in these stories. And definitely it's written on a level where the vast majority of people can understand and enjoy it. But that does not mean that it is devoid of higher sentiments and higher meanings,
Yeah,
as we will
absolutely.
surely get into.
Yeah. I would, I mean, being a heathen, being somebody that follows the ancestral religious tradition, I read quite a bit of folklore, quite a bit of the ancient texts and the lore and so on and so forth. And when I read pulp, more specifically, when I read heroic fiction, I find a lot of these themes, but not even just heroic fiction. You mentioned Lovecraft. I find that too, because what was folklore? Folklore was the oral tradition of the agrarian, lived people of the ancient world, so that they could carry on moral teachings or even just warnings of places. Don't go here because there's this scary something that lives there. Or what it was very much it was an appeal to emotion. It was an appeal to spirit. It wasn't this kind of galaxy brained Greek style of analytical. So, and not I'm not going against that, but that's not what it was. That's not what the people. When I say the people, I mean the people of the Heath. I mean the good old boys, right? The folks that were working the fields and building stuff, and the regular old folk. They didn't get into that kind of stuff. Those kinds of people, like most of us probably listening, we like stuff that's easy to remember. We like stuff that has a clear moral teaching. We like stuff that kind of gets us excited and makes us feel good, and or spooks us or freaks us out, or we like experience, and this is what the ancient tales did. Whether you're cracking open the Iliad, or you're cracking open, we're talking, Beowulf or something like that, or you're cracking open Conan the Barbarian, or perhaps Lord of the Rings, or like we're saying Lovecraft, or Clark Ashton Smith, or even stuff like Narnia, like Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, or even going forward into some of the later stuff, Michael Moorcock and Robert Jordan. And there's just so many authors that you can bring up that I believe have have that same. And while it is different, because we have to understand, we have this kind of um this compulsive self-hate, we as modern people, especially those of us that are, I guess you could say, traditionally minded, revolutionary minded, those of us that are in these spheres of dissident thought, have this kind of black cloud over ourselves, that we as modern people suck, our ancestors were great, everything, we are a fallen race, everything, we suck. And we got to get this out of our minds, because we are our ancestors, and we are different. And yeah, maybe there's some stuff about this time period that's not as good as the ancient times. However, we are the torchbearers, and we have to take our chapter seriously, and we have to take seriously our duty to continue carrying that torch, and to write. And while we are here, this is our chapter in the grand ancestral saga, and we must take it seriously and sincerely write a good chapter for the next people that come along, our kids and grandkids and great grandkids, so on and so forth. Because that is what these contemporary people did. This is what Lovecraft and Robert E.
Mm.
Howard did, and I believe that they were the last bastion of guys that really got it. You know what I mean? Folks, that writers and people that created stories, storytellers that really understood that primordial lineage going back. They might not have believed the same things we do, or they might not have thought the same things we do, and they're from a different world, but they understood it, right? So I think it's very important, not just for us to go and look at the folklore, which you ladies so excellently do, or go crack open the Poetic Edda, or go crack open these ancient books, but it's also important for us to look at the lineage that came just before us. And in my opinion, that lineage was in Pulp Fiction, because this Pulp Fiction stuff, it wasn't, as I said, galaxy brain, philosophical, grand analysis. This was stories by the people for the people. This was a folk art. This was a folk tradition. And just because it got printed on in a magazine doesn't make it any less of a folk tradition. And I think that it's a lot of fun to get into, and it's very exciting and exhilarating. And we can get into talking about these two guys, Howard and Lovecraft. They're like my two favorites ever. I think they belong
Mm.
on the Mount Rushmore of greatest creators of human history. I think they deserve to be there, because what they created was truly visionary. It was traditional. It was revolutionary. It was fun, and it was just inspiring and great. And they were just incredible. And I think that they deserve to be named among these people. Unfortunately, they
Yeah.
don't. Still to this day, they're still kind of seen as these fringe, kind of, offbeat, kind of weird, what they're not as good as the Ernest Hemingways, or not as good as the Fitzgeralds, and the what's her name, that lady, I can't remember her name. But I disagree. I think that their prose was polished and masterful. I find that their concepts and their characters were like I said, both visionary and primordial. I believe that they were just excellent, and I think that the tradition of Pulp
Yeah.
Fiction doesn't deserve the connotation that it was crap trash art for poor people. It's just not fair.
Yeah.
It's I love it. I
Uh,
think it's great.
Storytelling is so important for all people. And when you see how that has affected our world today, all of the themes and moral questions and everything that's been put into pop culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of that lineage does come from the Pulp Fiction in that area, that time period. I mean, from the late 30s and everything. They quote unquote know the power of stories.
Yeah.
They have used it intentionally to divert us from our path, and we have to take it back. And I have seen quite a few in the dissident circles advocate making our own stories, making radio theater with our own stories and everything. And I definitely agree with that. That would be a very good concept to get started. So I really hope there can be some progress on that. And what you say about how Pulp Fiction is viewed today, poo-pooed and everything. That sort of reminds me of the difference between folk tales and, Shakespeare and, the big literary geniuses and everything. And they both have their own strength. They're not in the same category, though they are both stories. So what you prefer will be a matter of taste. Some will prefer the high literature, other will prefer the more folkish tales that is a bit more down to earth and perhaps a bit more relatable and everything. Personally, I don't really need to relate to the stories I read. It just has to be a world that I can immerse myself in,
Exactly.
that I'm captured by, and then I really don't have a problem with the story itself.
Absolutely.
So definitely worth taking a new look at all of these stories, as I have been doing for a bit of time now. Definitely interesting and a very interesting concept, and how certain people are trying to claim things about at least some of the authors from back in the days. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah, we always do.
So yeah. Just sort of definitely I agree with your point there, Dave, that not everything has to be galaxy brained. There has to be a way, always, for the common people to access archetypes too.
Yeah.
Not everyone is some sort of priest class. And these archetypes are true, eternally true. And so, in anything that is good, they will find ways to crop up over and over again. But what I would like to get into is for anyone who perhaps doesn't know, because, maybe not everyone here is experienced with the Pulp Fiction. Like, who is Robert Irvin Howard, and lots his life and his sort of influences, and I know some sort of things about him. Regarded as the father of sword and sorcery, ambiguous birth date, apparently. Not really an important detail though, quibbling over 2 days either side. But yeah, sort of he was certainly growing up in a bit of a turbulent situation,
Mm.
wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Robert Irvin Howard, was born in Texas in 1906. He's an American. He was born to a family that was a little bit. It wasn't. He didn't have the best home life growing up. This guy, Robert E. Howard. So, he was growing up in Texas, and he was growing up at a time where Texas was experiencing a industrial boom. And his place, which is like, I believe it was Cross Plains, Texas. Somebody can correct me there. But, this was a time where a lot of oil refineries were being built. And, Robert E. Howard very much enjoyed growing up in this small town kind of vibe. He was, he's born to the for people that don't know, during this time, especially in the South in America, this was heavily, heavily Protestant. And by Protestant, I mean we're talking, fire and brimstone preachers. We're talking, a Calvinist work ethic. We're talking, this like hardcore old-timey Protestant Americana is where this guy grew up. And he saw in his time his little town, which he really loved, to become transformed effectively overnight. He saw these oil refineries moving in, and with these refineries came vagrant workers. A lot of them were not really the savory types, so a lot of crime and stuff just descended upon his area and his people, and he very much disliked this. Robert E. Howard was a guy that he was a huge fan of history. In fact, so much so that he said that he would have much preferred writing historical fiction. However, it would have taken too much time for him to get it right because he would have to, really, really do his study, and it just wasn't a financially viable move for him at the time. Which I mentioned earlier about how important Pulp Fiction was to the people of this time period. Uh, it was also it was a big thing for authors. There was such a demand for authors and people needed money. So it was for a lot of people,
Mm.
it was the only source of income that they could have, and so like it was so intense that there there was like a here's a little anecdote that they used to say. They used to say that every typewriter was sold with a bottle of whiskey, and this was the pulp writer's package. So it was like these people, they would type until their fingers would like fall off, right? They would start getting problems. What's that called?
The carpal tunnel,
Yeah, carpal tunnel
repetitive
syndrome.
strain
Yeah,
type thing. Yeah.
exactly. They would have these kinds of problems because they wrote that much. But Robert E. Howard, he grew up in this kind of environment. He's a guy that he had a very toxic, codependent relationship with a very abusive single mother, which a lot of people don't realize. And I think this
Mm.
was when we get into
I knew she had a lot of poor health, and
she did.
I knew that he hated the oil boom, and because he literally said, "I'll say one thing about an oil boom, it will teach a kid that life's a pretty rotten thing about as quick as anything I can think of."
Yeah. He was
So that he definitely felt that that totally ruined his town, and he sort of gets his ideas about boom and bust cycle and the growth and declines of civilizations, which
yeah,
crop up a lot
yeah.
from this boom and bust that he's witnessed, and all of these free riders that loaf about in a successful society. I didn't know his mother was abusive, though.
Yeah, she was, I can't remember, Robert E. Howard's father's name, but, his father was I believe his father was a butcher or something. He was a very blue collar guy, and his mother actually came from a very well-born, wealthy family, and his mother did not let him or his father forget it. She was very condescending, she was very nasty, and he had this very because his father was working all the time. I believe his father died very young too. But Robert E. Howard had this very codependent, toxic relationship with this mother, which we can assume was very manipulative, right? He was effectively in a single mother kind of situation. But as a young man, he was very like he was very intellectual. He was a guy that loved theology and history and archaeology, and was he was extremely well read on these things. He was probably a genius level IQ. He was a self taught guy, right? And he was also a very he was really big into physicality. He believed that being strong was the key to enlightenment and the key like he very much took that Nietzsche quote of manliness is the key to philosophy. And he was a boxer. He was an amateur bodybuilder. He was really big into wrestling and martial arts and hunting and fighting and fencing, and he
Mm,
was an athlete, and he loved combat, and he loved books and reading. He was an incredible guy, and he picked up writing, and he was a tremendous poet as well. A lot of people don't realize, but he started to write in these worlds, which eventually became known as the sword and sorcery genre, and he is effectively the father of that genre. And every fantasy, he pretty much set the standard. He wrote the blueprint for every fantasy hero since then. Every single fantasy hero since Conan has been a son of Conan. And he started out with a character named uh, Call the Conqueror, and he had Conan the Barbarian. He also had another character, it's a little less known, named Solomon Kane. And Solomon Kane was a character. He was a Puritan kind of demon
yes.
hunter, witch hunter.
He
Yeah,
he sort of crops up in Bowden's analysis on
yeah,
Robert E. Howard.
yup,
The loner man who fights through his sort of his own course, kind of a Cromwellian vibe about him. I mean, and Bowden quotes Cromwell. He said something like, "I disembowel you for Christ's love,"
yeah,
or something like that. So it's that kind of religion. It's
yup,
like I'll disembowel you because I'm in the right and I'm justified.
yeah. But, he wrote from I believe his first story was in 20 some I can't remember. It's so hard to remember all these years. But, he effectively wrote for only, like, 10 years because unfortunately, right after his mother, passed away, succumbed to tuberculosis, he, took his own life at the age of 30. And, in that short period of time that
Mhm.
Robert E. Howard wrote books, he wrote more stories than probably the overwhelming majority of professional
Yeah.
authors will write in their entire lives. He was prolific.
And is there much insight into why he took his life?
He couldn't handle the death of his mother. They were they were
Mm,
so codependent on one another that he couldn't handle it. He probably comes from a family of poor mental health. A lot of people know that uh, folks that do have genius level IQ tend to have some other really bad mental
mm,
traits, right? So it's kind of a question mark why he did that, but it was a tremendous loss for
yeah,
the community of pulp writers. So much so that his friend H.P. Lovecraft went into a deep depression because of it,
absolutely.
and the people in Lovecraft circles said that he never truly uh, got out of that. He never bounced back from
Oh,
that.
that's really sad. We can talk about their friendship a bit more. Um, the first thing I kind of wanted to pick on in Howard's work is this utter disdain for civilization,
Yes.
particularly in Conan. Utter disdain for modern civilizations. I guess we could speak to a few examples of that.
Yeah.
One of them being the incident with the House of Rogues. I think it is a piece that showcases that with the sort of contrast between how Morillo and the priest conduct themselves, and how Conan does as well, because that is certainly one in which Conan sort of has to deal with civilized ways of doing things. That and the Tower of the Elephant as well. I
Yeah, that was
think,
one of my favorites.
yeah. I mean, in the Tower of the Elephant, Conan has promised to do something to steal a jewel on behalf of a man, and gets found in the temple. And he personally wouldn't think of betraying who his employer was, you wouldn't think of it at all. He's given his word. Um, but he's there, and the man who employed him uh, actually turns up when he's being investigated and accused of murdering this guy who's been in the temple. And he expects some loyalty in return.
Hmm.
He expects this guy to to vouch for him and get him out of it, because this guy who's employed him to steal this jewel, the elephant's heart, is the reason that he's in the temple in the first place.
Mm.
But the guy just denies knowing him to his face, and says that he looks like just the sort of character to do murdering. And that enrages Conan deeply. And if I remember correctly, he kills the guy.
Yeah.
He just strikes his head off, because there's no concept in him of this civilized person's game of Machiavellianism. You don't think to save your own neck like that. You keep a word that you've given. And it would definitely reminded me of heathen attitudes towards oaths and words, and sort of traditional Indo-European attitudes of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Howard very much viewed, he was, I guess you could consider him like the first, he was like a proto anarcho primitivist or something like that. He very much blamed the weakness of modernity on civilization. And in one of his letters going back with H.P. Lovecraft, they were talking about the rise of Mussolini. And Lovecraft was a fan of Mussolini because Lovecraft was edgy and based, right? But Robert E. Howard didn't like him because he thought it was silly uh, trying to civilize Ethiopia by being uncivilized. So he very much viewed that society or civilization to be like this spreading, all devouring cancer that weakens people, and he viewed that the purest form of man, the purest form of humanity, was in this rugged kind of natural state of what some would call barbarism, right? That is what he viewed to be. That is how things should
Mm.
be, and the fact that we start bringing in all of these like this micromanaging and all this stuff of civilization um weakened people, and it weakened men, and when you enter into that cycle, you are inevitably dooming yourselves and your people. And there's some truth to what he's talking about, you know what I mean? Like he did
Yeah,
not
because the cycle always sort of repeats.
yeah, he very much viewed if you entered into the kind of the Spenglerian cycle at all and you began empire building, that is when you kind of sign your own death warrant. He said that the moment that you exchange what he considered to be your humanity for comfort and civilization is when you began your death phase. And it's just it was a take of that period that nobody really had. That was like, this is a time where they were kind of coming out of poverty and coming out of tough times, coming out of starvation and squalor. And this is a time where technology and civilization were improving people's lives and making people more safe and more comfortable. So for Howard to have this position at that time was kind of strange for everybody around him. But now looking back, some of his stuff is a little reactionary, a lot of because that's the nature of man.
Yeah.
He
He's
reacts
sitting there
against.
and he's saying we're getting too safe.
Yeah,
We're
we're
getting
getting
too
too safe.
comfortable.
Yup, exactly.
We're losing our edge. We're like Marilla, where you can smell the shampoo in the hair from a mile off.
Yup,
And
exactly.
we're getting soft. And obviously, the times when he's writing technology's only just starting to improve people's life. They're going, I still have to do a fair bit of hard work in my life. I deserve a few comforts. But it's like he's almost foreseen where we're at now, where it's like, hey, Alexa, order me a Domino's,
Yeah.
you know? And that is undeniably too much comfort.
Yeah. So that was
Thanks.
you know,
Any thoughts, by the way?
Um, I definitely get his view when there's, a boom in a place with a lot of influx of people. While I haven't experienced that myself to the degree he did, I do think we all have experienced that during our lifetime. And when the place starts to change into something you can hardly recognize, and the degradation that comes with it, in particular when it comes to increased crime and everything, that can really leave you quite disdainful for everything. So I definitely relate to that. And also the time he lived in was quite a big upheaval, both socially and with technology and everything. So yeah, it seems like you either go with the flow or you get quite disdainful and protest it.
Yeah.
I do think it's very interesting how so many different people could see where everything was leading. Contrast Howard and Lovecraft with, for example, Tolkien. They all saw at least parts of what was coming, but they came from very different point of views themselves. So yeah, definitely something my mind can tend to ponder on. And yeah, the disdain for civilization in Howard's stories are incredible.
Yeah.
And I do have to say that I quite see his point of view at times.
Absolutely. By the way, sorry if I woke anyone's Alexa up there, but you shouldn't have one. Throw it out the window. It's listening to everything you say.
Yeah.
Oh dear. You're about to say something, Dave.
Oh, I forget. It's gone.
Sorry.
No, you're
Yeah.
good.
No, I can sometimes struggle with something like that as well. Like if I don't say a thought, sometimes it do be gone. Um, but yeah. So this disdain for civilization is inherent in Howard's work, and I suppose we can talk a bit more about how he idealizes the barbarian and what sort of traits and honor codes that he sort of thinks we should emulate in the barbarian.
Sure. A lot of people, I think they sort of mistake Howard as an advocate for like pure on might is right, and sometimes that is apparent in his writings. However, he was a big fan of um the concept of principle, right? Conan, if you read Conan, you will find a barbarian. You will find a guy that is violent and virile and at times unpredictable, and he just seems like a pure barbar. But Conan at the same time is a very principled character, and this goes for all of his characters. Um, he believed that goodness should come from the heart. He was a big fan of things should come from the heart and come from within, and you should want to do these things because they are good, not because civilization deems them to be so, right? So
Mm.
this is a theme that you see a lot in Howard's writings. Like for example, we were talking about the introduction piece had the theme from the movie. In the movie, they talk about this riddle of steel, right? And in Howard's writings, they talk about the riddle of steel. Like, what is the riddle of steel? And in the movie, they talk about it. And in the beginning, Conan's father is saying, you know, the riddle of steel is it is steel itself. What does he say? He says something along the lines of, it is not men you can trust, nor women, nor kings. This you can trust. And he holds up the blade, saying, this is what you can trust. And then later in the movie, Bolts of Doom, he says to Conan after he's defeated him, he says, he's like, steel is not strong, boy. Talking about the riddle of steel. He says,
Mm.
flesh is stronger. What is a sword but the hand that wields it? And he's like, and to illustrate this, he says, now go, contemplate this on the tree of woe. And he sends him over under the tree of woe, and he has to hang there, which is a very Odinic
Oh, yeah.
representation, by the way. Yeah. And here is where Conan contemplates his strength and contemplates and draws his will. It's extremely Odinic, right? But the truth is that neither of them were right. The true riddle of steel is not the flesh nor the blade. It is the heart of the man. That is the riddle of steel. And that is what lets you into Crom's Valhalla, is if you know that, you learn that it is both the steel being wielded by the flesh, but guided by the man's heart. And that was what Robert E. Howard was all about, was that goodness and truth and principle and these things should come from a virtuous man's heart, even if he is barbaric, even if he is savage, even if he is violent, right? That these things transcend
Mm.
the concepts of civilization.
Yeah, it's an inherent trait, you could say. Either you do what's right or
Yeah.
you don't. It doesn't really matter where you come from, you know?
I feel like this brings us on to the subject of Crom. Because the god Crom is described in interesting ways
Yeah.
as not particularly requiring any worship, but as giving a man, certain natural qualities at birth and expecting that he uses them,
Yep. Exactly.
which I think is an interesting sort of approach to religion. But then you also see a sort of distorted equivalent of the Norse and Anglo-Saxon heathenism in Howard as well, with the Aesir and the Vanir and Ymir,
Yeah,
who
it's certainly
lives in
stylized. Yeah.
Vanaheim, and it has Valhalla, which obviously to both of us as heathens, is a bit weird. Like, Ymir and Valhalla? No, mate, you've got that mixed up. Ymir was like a primordial being at the beginning of the world. He isn't in Valhalla. But the sort of archetypes have gotten a bit confused.
Yeah,
But they're there in
certainly
spirit.
stylized. Yeah.
And so you feel like Robert E. Howard definitely has this notion of the warrior path to transcendence, the sort of achieving of the immortality, making the leap to the gods, Evolian style, via battle.
I don't know if I would agree with that all the way.
Okay.
I would say that because I can't think of any point in any of the stories where any of the men in or the characters in the Conan stories went through like an apotheosis. I would very much see that I I sort of describe kind of the Howard's works as illustrating becoming who you are, like becoming what you are and who you are in its most authentic form. That is kind of what Howard really, and you notice this all the time. I believe the quote that you mentioned earlier about one of the stories where Conan says something along the lines of, I prefer the company of savages because They have the respect of each other because they worry
Yeah,
about their heads
like
getting split or something like that.
it's on the Hartford Europa Telegram. It's sort of in the internal monologue of the book,
Yeah.
and I believe what we put out was civilized men are more discourteous than savages because they know they can be impolite without having their skulls split, which honestly is a I read a lot of Pratchett, and that's also a very Pratchett-esque sort of sentence, but Pratchett is being Howard-esque in the way he writes. I'm sort of seeing where Pratchett might have got his influences from, but that was sort of in the internal monologue of the book, as I remember.
Yeah, and this illustrates kind of this disdain Howard has for what he viewed to be um, civilized people and people that work for the state and work for the government and work for the corporations being insincere and inauthentic. Right? He didn't. You see this theme over and over and over again in his stories, where the guy that lies through his teeth or tells half
Mm,
truths or does some Machiavellian kind of stuff. Those guys always get their heads separated. Those guys always end up
yeah.
dead. He hated those kinds of people. He thought you should be bluntly honest, who you are, let it
Mm,
all out on display all the time, and that is the truest, rawest form of man. He also, he never had this, he doesn't really have a whole lot of themes of transcendentalism. Everything is very imminent. It's very in the natural world, right? Like I posted this quote so many times, and Katrina, me and you talked about it last time we talked. He said, he talks about his character. He said, "My characters are more man than these real men are. They have hands and they have bellies. They lust and they hate. You
mm,
scratch the surface of civilization and you find the ape roaring and red-handed." And that's how he viewed man, as although man is
yeah.
this lowly creature that can't escape being man, what they are is good and they should be that, right? And they should become that to the best of their ability. And that is something that Howard puts on in a lot of his that theme is reoccurring in a lot of his stories. And I
Mm,
think that it's beautiful and I think it's really really cool because later on you do start seeing a lot of this a lot of transcendentalism. And transcendentalism I think a lot of the time comes from modern people hating themselves and thinking that there's something greater than being a human and that they should be allowed to have access to that. They should be allowed to have access into the halls of the gods. I should be able to become a god. Why can't I? And Howard said no. Howard said, "No, you are a man, but it is good to be a man. So you should become a man," right? And this theme is also found in Lovecraft.
really?
However, Lovecraft's themes are a little bit different, a little bit darker, right?
Yeah.
Lovecraft, when you get into the Lovecraft idea, Lovecraft wasn't saying you should become a man. He's saying you are a lowly man and you are an insignificant little speck in the entirety of the cosmos, and there are things out there floating that are far beyond your comprehension that could completely obliterate everything that you know and you think without even knowing it. So it was like this they both had
Mm,
this idea of the confined man.
yeah. No, that's certainly yeah. The Howard's got sort of a life positive, human positive attitude. I can see that when he's sort of talking about drink and women and fighting. Conan is definitely joyous in life.
Absolutely.
You also get the impression though that he wouldn't think it was a great shame if he died in battle, because it it's sort of his attitude reminded me of the sort of the cattle die, kinsmen die, deeds of a man never die
Yep.
type of verse from the Edda, and that's what I really mean by achieving transcendence via the warrior path. That's what I mean when I say that. We have a diamond, though, and a request to make Big Dave say the Conan line.
Which line is that? Conan's got a lot of lines.
To crush your enemies.
To see them driven before you and to hear the lamentations of the women.
Yep, that one.
It's bass. It's a bass line. That'd like get you riled up.
It's great. It's eminently memeable as well. It's been memed in many formats. But yeah, no, that's sort of what I mean. Like, he seems to promote this idea of great men. You know, men who achieve fame in their lifetime and possibly almost immortality thereafter by their deeds. I mean, if Conan was a person who existed, Conan would most certainly go to Valhalla.
Absolutely.
I can't see him dying in bed. No way.
That's something you see a lot, and I can't remember what story, but there's a scene in one of the stories where Conan and his companions come across this really vile ape man, right? There's a lot of these kind of missing link, simian kind of, ape men in his story. He was very interested in kind of the like proto-human species that existed before humanity. He was very interested in that. But there's this one that they come into contact with, and his companions say something along the lines of nobody's ever defeated this beast, or so. How can we stand against this beast or whatever? And Conan's like, I don't care, let's do it. And he goes and he just fights this monster, and they like get into a match, and he eventually like breaks its neck, or like they pretty much get into this crazy fight, and he wins, and he's like, and just like that kind of scene is just over and over and over. Conan he don't care if they come into contact with something that nobody's ever beaten. It's just like impending doom. It's just more reason for Conan to go charging in, and that's just so awesome, because it's just like that heroic, no regard for your safety, no regard for anything besides fame and fortune and glory, and just like, riches and wine
Yeah.
and women. And it's just like there's something there. A lot of people, like, there's some people out there that are more aesthetically minded, right? Or aesthetically minded, I should say, that would find that repulsive or something like that. But I find that there's something wholesome in that. There's something wholesome and very pure in that kind of just raw masculine energy of wanting to just like get rich and get
Yeah.
good looking ladies and party and fight, and just like there's just something cool about that. And it's something that's very immersive and relatable, because as a guy, what is every guy like fantasize about? Every guy fantasizes about doing some heroic stuff. I mean, like, you're just like walking through the store and you're like fantasizing about terrorist attack, and you go in, you sneak behind all the terrorists, and you stab them all to death, and you heroically save everybody. And it's just guys think about that kind of stuff. So when you pick up Conan and it's literally that kind of stuff, it's really relatable. And I get a little frustrated with modern authors, limp-wrist modern authors, when they say that Conan the Barbarian is just a power fantasy. Like, I just
Yeah.
posted about this on my Telegram, and I said something along the lines of, only a like academic limp wrist man rodent would find dreaming about
Yeah.
power to be contemptible,
And
right?
also, he isn't, because he doesn't do these things just to have power. Like, at several points, like, say when women are interacting with him, he doesn't do things to them gratuitously just to have power over them.
No.
Like, he does actually respect them. Like, he takes them in hand when you'll often find him taking a female character in hand when her emotions are running away with her, and she's being silly, basically.
Yeah.
Um, which, is then something that usually there's these outlier women in the stories, and they are, exceptional. They can get one over on most men. And then they meet Conan, and suddenly he's the first man who's actually difficult to deal with. And if it was just a power fantasy, I guess he'd just outright just subdue them with force, which he's nearly tempted to do, actually, in Daughter of the Frost Giants. We see that he's kind of capable of being, driven mad with frenzy in that, because he very nearly outright rapes a woman. But that isn't something that goes well for him. That's not something that Howard ends up endorsing, because this daughter of the god Ymir, she calls down her father, and because she really doesn't want to interact with Conan in that way, she does actually, in the story, get away. Where if it was truly a power fantasy, then even the truly reluctant woman would be forced to interact with Conan,
Yeah.
I would say. And then coming on to the women, aren't we? We're coming on to the women in Conan, and an interesting statement made by the Robert E. Howard Foundation, that he is somehow a proto-feminist. What do you think of that one, Dave?
I think that's well, first of all, the Robert E. Howard Foundation is owned by some like old roasties that aren't even related to Robert E. Howard in any way. It was like some financier parasite bought it up years ago, and they inherited it. So they're not even remotely related to Robert E. Howard. And I would be shocked if they actually like read all of Robert E. Howard or even liked Robert E. Howard. They're just a bunch of weirdos. But as far as him being a proto feminist, it I mean, how? Like, I don't even know where they get off like saying this. Like, all the women in Conan are like hot, right? they're like all babes. They're all scantily clad. The overwhelming majority of them are swooning over Conan or some other great hero. It's a clearly a patriarchal world. There's the occasional woman that does something like clever when Conan gets into trouble or something like that. But they do it out of love for Conan, right? They don't like do it to empower themselves or liberate themselves from the patriarchy or anything like that. They do it because they love Conan, right?
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
I don't get where they get off saying that. It's retarded.
Well,
Neither do I.
there was one story where Conan was preparing to fight some pirates because he and this woman was on an island and had to get out of there. And of course, Conan was taken prisoner. He was alone against, I think, 70 pirates or something. So, and they were fighting whether to kill him or not, or to let him join them. And then the woman picked up her courage and rescued Conan in the middle of the night. So, yeah, it had to be feminist, of course. But then Conan, when he is freed, picks her up and carries her away. And she's thinking how safe he makes her feel. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind
Oh
of
my
crushes
God.
that
Oh,
feminist
dear.
dream.
How feminist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's sort of the very opposite of feminism, really, from my view. And I do think, speaking as a woman, when you get actually feminist fantasies, you can't relate to them. You can't, because as a woman, you don't want to high kick 15 men to death.
No.
You don't.
No, absolutely not.
You know, this sort of thing is about how an outlier, exceptional woman deserves an outlier, exceptional man. And mostly when he turns up and meets them, they're grumpy and unhappy and fed up with men because none of them are actually measuring up to the standards that they need, because they actually do need a man who is better than them. They need a man who is capable of guiding them. They need someone who's a level up on them, because the female instinct is to aim a bit higher, to be hypergamous. And these women have been unhappy because they can't find that.
They can't find any good men in civilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then
It's like a flex
Conan
on
comes along,
civilization.
and he's like the embodiment of the active masculine force, and they finally don't have to go around doing everything for themselves, which, whether they knew it or not, was what they wanted all along. Especially with Valeria. Like, in the beginning of Red Nails, she doesn't seem to know, like, exactly what she wants. And, like, I don't know how you could call Robert E. Howard a feminist when, he talks in that book about Valeria learning to fear a man. As if it's a good thing. Which, yeah, in a way, it is. Like, a woman has to learn at some point that, yeah, men are physically stronger. And you don't
Every woman,
mess with them, and you kind of need to cooperate with them to be protected.
every woman will learn that at some point in their life, I think.
Yes.
At least the vast majority. Or whether you learn it as through your own just realization, or whether you learn that by being actually knocked out by a man because you're so obnoxious and you don't know where the line goes. And the latter seems to be more and more prevalent in many cases, which is definitely a huge failing on part of society, which we definitely have to put right.
It shouldn't ever have to get to that point.
No.
A woman shouldn't be allowed to run around thinking she can just, do and say whatever she likes until she meets a man who really is psycho enough to knock her flat on her backside.
Yeah.
It should be established from quite early on, like, that we have these gender norms and these sort of, like, requirements of some chaperoning and sort of requirements to be careful for a reason. And that is because you've got a physically weaker body, and you have the responsibility also at some point in the future possibly to nurture, to bear life. And therefore you have to act in a slightly different way when it comes to a point of maturity. But then also, I guess the books speak to the power that women can have over men as well. Particularly in the situation where Conan meets Belit. She's basically the brains of that pirate crew. Goodness, what is the book called?
You're talking Queen of the Black Coast?
Queen of the Black Coast, yeah. I keep forgetting the name of it. But in Queen of the Black Coast, like, it's very clear how Billet's sexual power, her beauty, has a whole army of men
She's got a whole
at
bunch of
her
simps.
command. Yep, a whole bunch of mainly African simps,
Jafaris.
Jafaris, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's again like, and then she leads Conan into some hot water, going on an errand to a city that's lost and cursed, get some treasure, and her greediness for treasure leads Conan into some trouble, for sure. So he does give examples of the sort of the soft power that women can wield, because basically because of Conan's intense admiration and love for her, she has Conan as her sword. He'll go wherever and do whatever, as long as like she's about and there's some ships to raid. So yeah, he's not blind to the ways in which women can get one over on men, or the ways in which they have power.
Yeah, we see that all the time. How many like e-celeb women do we see that just command these entire groups of simps? They have these like simp hives of men that they'll never meet, that they'll never even address, intimately or personally, that just do whatever they want on this woman's whim. So it's like that's something that's just it's not a feminist thing to point that out. That's just reality. There are weak men that will let themselves be deceived and commanded by a manipulative, beautiful woman.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's taking advantage of sort of a natural urge that men have to want to impress and protect women.
Yeah, it is. It is predatory.
So yeah, definitely not a proto-feminist there.
No.
If anything, a gender traditionalist with added extra elitism, which is, and it's kind of hierarchical. But we should probably it's about 1:15 the hour. We should probably move on to a bit of Lovecraft, because we haven't really talked much about him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We have another excerpt ready for that, so let's bring it over.
The Call of Cthulu by H.P. Lovecraft. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
So yeah, the very classical and well-known Call of Cthulhu. I actually heard of that one for the first time a couple of years ago, and that was in connection to the Game of Thrones books, with the inspiration that George R. R. Martin probably got from those stories. So it was good to finally start to listen to some of them.
Yeah, Lovecraft is like was he a visionary? That guy. I can't. So if you, I guess we could start out with kind of a quick historical overview of who Lovecraft was. Is that you guys want to do
Sure.
that? So,
Yeah.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island. This is a big part of his identity. He was a strong advocate of regionalism, localism. He loved his home city. He loved um, his hometown. It was, in fact, on his tombstone, it says, "I am Providence." It was such a big deal to him. But he was born in 1890 to Winfield Lovecraft and Susan Phillips Lovecraft, and they were of English descent. They were right out of they were like old blood Americans right over from England, and that was also a big part of um, H.P. Lovecraft's identity. He was what some people would call an Anglophile. He considered uh, the English people and those descended of to be the kings of the world, and everybody else was third world squalor. Like even in his early days, in his writings of what he would a journal he called the Conservative, he spoke of even like Germans and Italians as being like subhumans. He like was really big into being Anglo, right?
Uh,
So he was born in 1890 there, and unfortunately, it appeared that mental illness was very apparent in his family as well. You're going to find some early life parallels between Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, which is probably why they had such a strong connection with each other. But his father, Winfield, uh, it's unsure what happened to him. The official record is from syphilis, but HP said that it was not from syphilis. His dad went into a mental institution when he was very young and was there for quite a few years until he finally died there. And he was raised by his
mhm.
mother Susan, and they lived in his maternal grandfather's estate. um, Whipple Van Buren Phillips was his name, and his grandfather, he loved him dearly. That was like his dad. That was Whipple Van Buren was a very successful businessman. He was self-made. He came from a very well-to-do pedigree of Anglo Americans. He owned a very beautiful estate there in Providence, and most importantly, he had a vast library, which during that time in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, to have a library meant that you had wealth and you were a learned man. Books were expensive back then. So, Mr. H.P. Lovecraft spent most of his childhood in this library, hanging out with his grandfather, reading books, and he read everything, man. He read everything from ancient history to philosophy, politics, to anything you can imagine. He even created his own when he was like 10 years old. He created his own archaeology magazine. He was just a brilliant young
Nice.
man. He was brilliant, and he read a lot of early American stuff. He read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe was a big influence on him at the time, and he was self-educated. But the thing is, as a little boy, Howard Phillips Lovecraft was not of good health. He was he was very weak-bodied. He was a very gaunt little boy, um, and his mother didn't. didn't let him forget that. She would come up with nasty nicknames to belittle him. She was a very abusive single mother, which he also had a very codependent relationship with her about with just like with Robert E. Howard. But he was a very intellectual and bookish young man. Um, so much so in his isolation and in his study and his research at a very young age, when he would go, and he wrote about this in his letters, when he would go hang out with the other children, they thought he was weird because he read so much old stuff that he spoke in a very antiquated manner. He had almost like a weird old timey accent, and the little kids used to make fun of him and bully him because of it. He never really found any friends. He was very much a loner. We would consider him. He was probably autistic. A lot of folks really believe strongly that he was on the autism spectrum. He was, like I said, he was a very gaunt, weak-bodied person. Uh, he was most certainly of genius IQ. He was just he's a little bit of a tragic figure. He had bouts of severe depression throughout his entire life, his which probably was brought on by his mother. But very early on, he spoke of when he was a little boy, he would see these dark, demonic figures that would come to him in the night, and he would see them every single night, and they would terrify him. And this experience, this supernatural experience, went on to inform a lot of his writing later on. um what happened was eventually his mother passed, and or his grandfather passed, and his mother couldn't keep the money up and keep it going, and then eventually she passed, and he went to go live with his aunts, who were some people speculate to be lesbians, but who knows if that's true, right? They were just nasty old roasties, and they were horrible to him too. And his very early work, he was not strong of arm. He was a very weak man, so he was very tall and lanky and not an attractive looking fella. He got a job sealing letters for some local business. That's what he did. He would seal hundreds and hundreds of letters all day long. That was the only work he could find outside of writing. Which one of the folk tales around, one of the legends around how Lovecraft was found was he was writing hate mail to a writer from a certain publisher. He hated this guy so much. He like assaulted him with letters every time he would this guy would release a story. Lovecraft would write all of these critiques saying how he has no talent, he's trash, and like he just like completely ripped this guy apart, just gutted him every chance he
Wow.
hated him, right? Hated him. Was like, oh, it's so insane. So the publishing company was like, they were reading his letters and they're like, this guy is really brilliant writer. And they're like, okay, send us something. So he sent in some work, and along with his work, he dropped to Weird Tales magazine. It was a few works. One of them was, and this was in 1917. One of them was Dagon. Another one was I can't remember which ones, but along with he gave him like 3 or 4 stories, and along with them, he pretty much wrote them this insane, like 15,000 word letter saying, "Don't you dare change a single word on my stories. They are perfect the way that they are, and um everything that you guys have been printing up until now sucks, and this is the new stuff. And what I have written, what I have created is the best horror that anybody has ever read, but I don't care whether or not you put it in." It's just like this like nasty, horrible letter that he sent these people. And but they read it and it blew their hair back. They never saw anything like this. Because up
It's
until
like,
Lovecraft, go ahead, I'm sorry.
so they're basically like, wow, this guy's horrible and really good at writing horrible things. He's in.
Yeah, Lovecraft was not the kind of guy you would want to bring over for beer. He was hypercritical. Was he was narcissistic. He was not a nice guy. He was a guy that was he was kind of self-hating, but he was also an egotist at the same time. So he sent these stories in, and these stories, they just like blew these people's minds. What they were creating before Lovecraft was like, very basic gothic horror, was like, the ghost in the mansion on the hill kind of stuff. And it was like, or the killer of, blah, blah, blah. It was like, it was very basic, mundane kind of horror. And then Lovecraft comes in with his concepts of cosmicism and, like the fear of the unknown and like all this kind of stuff and all these different flavors of this philosophical type of horror. Effectively, what happened was he barged into a factory where they were producing cars, and he said, "All of these cars suck. Here's a rocket ship." And he brought something that was never even fathomed before, and it was like it was immediately created a cult following. And because of his talent and his ability, he
Hmm.
developed what is now called the Lovecraft Circle, which was a circle of authors that were up and coming. One of them was, Robert E. Howard, which we just spoke about at length. In this group, you had Clark Ashton Smith, you had Frank Belknap Long, you had quite a few other authors in this group that looked up to Lovecraft because he was so brilliant. And despite all of his negative traits, H.P. Lovecraft had this gigantic heart. He loved his friends so deeply, and he wrote something to the tune of 60,000 letters in his lifetime to his friends that he would talk about and encourage them and tell them that their stories were great and give them pointers on
Hmm.
how to get better. And he was just their mentor, and he was a tremendous mentor and lifted these guys up to the level that they probably wouldn't have gone on their own. And
He sounds a lot like the many autistic people then that you might meet. Like really not holding anything back in terms of when he thinks something is wrong. Obsessive about what he likes and what he doesn't like, but a really loyal friend as well.
yeah, he
If
was.
you actually manage to become friends.
If you managed to get H.P. Lovecraft's approval, he cherished you. You know what I mean? He was such a good friend to these people and such a great mentor. But unfortunately, because of his physical state throughout his life, and he was a what's the word for it? He was like he would lock himself away quite a bit. He suffered from bouts of
A
depression a
shut in.
lot, and he was a shut-in, yeah, or a recluse, right? He would just, like, shut himself in for sometimes weeks on end and just not talk to anybody, and he was just really weird and out there and eccentric and, suffered from, some mental illness and, all this kinda stuff, and he married this woman, and her name was something something Green, and they moved to New York, and he hated it. He hated New York. He was there for a few years, they became estranged, and he eventually moved back to Providence, where they were eventually divorced. And he came back, and he had a little bit of a he kind of evolved a little bit from his experience in New York, because early in the days he thought the way that he did, and then he went to New York. And when he came back from New York came back to Providence, he's like, "Yay, Germans and Italians, you guys aren't so bad compared to those guys they got it going on up in New York." He's like, "Sorry about that stuff
Oh
I
dear.
said, Tony. Let me get a slice of pepperoni." Like, sorry about all that. That what he
Yeah.
went through in New
He
York
realized
really.
you can't be picky with your Europeans
Yeah, he
in the
eased up
day
on
and
the
age.
other Europeans after his experiences in New York, which, if you go find his letters, what he wrote about that, he does not hold back his opinions of those people that lived up there. But, he wrote more stories going on, and then I believe his final story was called "The Color Out of Space," which they actually just recently made a little movie about, starring Nick Cage. It's kind of like a retelling or an adaptation about it. But um, uh, his stories to this day have changed the way that we not only the way that we tell horror stories, but the way that we understand horror today. There is not a horror story written or a horror movie written today that does not have the influence of H.P. Lovecraft. If you understand, to criticize horror as we understand it today is to criticize H.P. Lovecraft himself. his stuff is timeless. It will freak people out. It is a concept that is just completely timeless. People are going to be reading Call of Cthulhu and at the Mountains of Madness and Shadow over Innsmouth and all of his stories until the
Mm.
end of time. And they're still in the year 3500. People are still going to find his stories freaky because they dig into something that is primordial, a primordial fear
They
that is
do.
Yeah,
timeless.
he was
I
a
mean,
very huge influence on Stephen King, which is probably the horror author who is most widely known in our days. And I definitely saw quite a connection between the two. So, yeah, he definitely seems to have shaped the entire genre. And with his personality, it probably wasn't the best environment to grow up with some how to say it, eccentric women perhaps. He might have had a
Yeah.
bit better time if he had a bit of a more normal childhood, I would say.
Yeah, he had a, just like Mr. Howard, he had a toxic codependent relationship with an abusive single
Yeah,
mother. And that really shaped both of them. And like I mentioned before, when Robert E. Howard took his life in 1936, um, H.P. Lovecraft was devastated by this. He went into a very deep depression because he absolutely adored Robert E. Even though they argue, they have you. If you go find Lovecraft's letters, they go on for we're talking like hundreds of letters, just arguing. They were kind of frenemies, right? Trying to one up each other a little bit, and but they were just they were so tremendously influenced by one another. So when Howard took his own life, that crushed Lovecraft, and he went into deep depression. And his friends said that he never truly recovered from it.
yeah. Um, there was something I was, yeah, that was it. He didn't have that much success in his lifetime, but that was in many cases his own fault because he was really terrible at selling his stories. If it was rejected once, he put it aside. So
yeah,
a lot of what he wrote came posthumously, I think. So I might, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, after he passed, actually,
absolutely.
one of his friends that was in the Lovecraft circle, another um, Weird Tales author, another Weird Tales alumni, Clark Ashton Smith, and a few others got together and they got his writings together and they created Arkham House, which was dedicated to preserving and proliferating the great works of H.P. Lovecraft. And think about it like this: if they didn't do that, it's very possible none of us would have ever heard of H.P. Lovecraft, and that our storytelling to this day in the horror genre would still just be vampires and ghosts in the mansion. It-
Yeah,
like everything from horror to fantasy to sci-fi would probably not even exist the way that we enjoy it today.
yeah,
and that is a a devastating thought in and of itself. So definitely, um, kudos to them for doing that and recognizing that for what it was. I mean, I guess we should talk about some of the things that make Lovecraft's work so so chilling. I particularly noticed that he's very obsessed with the sea. He's very obsessed with the sea and fishy creatures. Any sort of insight as to sort of why that is?
Well, Lovecraft was and everybody knows his quote about the oldest and most primal fear is fear of the unknown. That whole quote, and Lovecraft was very big on digging into that which freaks people out, which is that which you cannot see. You know what I mean? That which you cannot understand, that which is beyond your reach of fathom. And the bottom of the ocean being from Rhode Island, which is right by the ocean, that was a big thing for him. He probably looked out upon the sea and like was very inspired by its vastness, and it probably reminded him of outer space, right? So he combined two things that freak people out: the depths of the ocean and the far reaches of the galaxy, to create just like this amalgamate of all of these things that people don't understand and that freak people out, right? A lot of people think when they see the octopus tentacles, they associate that with the aesthetic of cosmic horror, and it's not. They're not really interconnected that much, but uh, it's like the octopus tentacle is it's like such an alien appendage, right? It's so weird to us as terrestrial land walking mammals, right? To us as human beings, to this articulating, arm with like weird little suckers on it, and there's like many of them. It was just, and there's theories out there that the cephalopods do come from outer space. I've read that before. So there's just so much that goes that he put into his aesthetic to make it have is like this amalgamation of all of these elements from all of these like far-flung places that humans fear.
He does have one story about a man who is a generational lighthouse watchman, and that goes into how because this man has grown up by the sea in very remote areas, and how the sea is talking to him and basically taking him for a trip, which might be in his imagination. I don't remember which tale it was, but I do get the feeling that he was somewhat speaking from his own experience, growing up by the coast, very isolated and
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, I definitely felt like he was somewhat talking about himself there.
I mean, with in terms of the sea with symbolism, obviously the sea's got a lot of primeval source of life, subconscious symbolism, and it must have seemed for a lot of people, and it still appears, formless, limitless, almost,
Yeah.
which I think is why it taps into uh, the primeval chaos archetype and the the forces of chaos that we know are there. And of course, Lovecraft, being an atheist, uh, really thinks that humanity is the only buffer against these forces of chaos, which must be a terrifying world to live in,
Well,
for sure.
a interesting point in Indo-European comparative study, there is one thing that is found to be cognate among many pantheons is that there's either a brotherhood or an association or some kind of there's always some sort of connection between the sky father and the sea father. The Indo-Europeans viewed the sea and the sky almost as reflections of one another. So the fact that Lovecraft made that connection
Mm.
is pretty incredible. Now, to understand Lovecraft. Now, Lovecraft wrote a lot in a lot of different. A lot of people don't realize it wasn't all just octopus monsters from outer space. He wrote a lot of stuff. He wrote a lot of stories that were very based in promoting an idea that we would now understand to be something like fictional realism. That he believed that the world of imagination was just as important as the real world. He had a lot of really wild ideas that were not something that you would find from like a fedora wearing atheist of today. He very much
Well,
believed in a lot of very out there metaphysical things.
I mean, that reminds me of something which Bowden actually said in it, more in his analysis of um, Howard, but it sort of rings true in this case as well, which is the G.K. Chesterton viewpoint of the emotional truth of mythology. Myth is the commingling of emotional reality with what is understood to be fact. So certain things are, spiritually speaking, true. And a lot of these things about chaos and the forces thereof, and man not actually being meant to comprehend all things, that Lovecraft frequently, you know, plays within his works, are quite emotionally true.
I think he balances that quite well when you look at his different stories with the very materialistic point of view, which was quite prevalent at the time or really starting to emerge, with, you know, the mad scientist, which features in quite a few of his stories.
Yeah.
You know, one tale about a head transplant succeeding, waking people.
Yeah, you got Reanimator, Herbert
Uh,
West.
that one as well, but I was mainly thinking about its internment, where this the protagonist contracts. I think it was leprosy. It was, and he had this doctor friend who suggests that in order not to be ostracized, he could fake his own death because he had this compound that he had got from Haiti, Haitian thing. And, you know, they could pretend he was dead and then he would be taken out of the grave and revived and everything. And all of that happens, and then he finds out that he is really his friend's big medical experiment. And while he was wakened back to life, he had also generously been given a head transplant. So, yeah. Definitely a tale that makes your skin crawl.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely dealing with some of the horrors of science there as
Yeah.
well in itself. As a
Definitely
force.
see a lot of Frankenstein in those category of tales of his.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess with Lovecraft, what I kind of want to discuss is maybe the fact that, you know, a lot of his work came from dreams, and sort of yeah, this notion of the primordial and the cycles, and he evokes a lot of time ancestral memories of things. So those are things that Lovecraft is definitely very in touch with.
Yeah, absolutely. He very much viewed that there was a river of consciousness. Like when he speaks about kind of, you know, like I said, fictional realism kind of stuff, this dream world. He talks about this dream world a lot. And one of them, one of the stories that's in the dream world is called the Silver Key. And that, as a homage to Mr. Lovecraft in Bizarre Archives 2, the preface of the book is called The Silver Key. And I talk about this, and I talk about the strength of imagination and the strength of dreams and going into the dream world and all this kind of stuff. He very much viewed this as a river, effectively a river from which all people can draw from, He had he was a very bad materialist. He called himself a materialist, but he believed in far too many metaphysical things to actually be a materialist. Everything from
Yeah.
um
He was almost like in the it's illogical to believe that the world is logical camp.
he was strange, right? He was just an eccentric, paradoxical, unique guy that contradicted a lot of his statements with other things, and he was just really out there and he was just an incredible guy. You know, it was just
I mean, we were saying in the pre-chat, perhaps if there'd been a serious effort um, to reconstruct a tradition of you know, an Indo-European tradition in Lovecraft's time, he would have been one of the people who maybe latched onto it.
yeah, absolutely. He was in his hyper traditionalism and all this stuff. He was also extremely critical of Christianity, extremely critical of it. He was also, despite him, writing all of these stories about the occult, he found occultism and like Victorian era um, new age kind of stuff. He thought it was so silly, and he even talked about going to like magic shops and seeing all of these books as forgeries and hoaxes and stuff made up for people to make money, and called them all parlor tricks. And he just had this really critical view of the accepted religious understandings and spiritual understandings of the time, while at the same time he like loved he romanticized the ancient polytheisms, right? That was and a lot of people have and rightly so, because he kind of admits this, that in creating the Cthulhu mythos, he is reconstructing a polytheism of sorts, right? You have if you go and if you pay attention in his stories and you piece them together, you know, Cthulhu has a father and there's a mother and there's a son, and these entities that he describes, they're almost like the Aesir and the Vanir, right? They're or the Olympians. They're this related family of entities that exist and interact with the humanity. So he sort of, in his romanticization of polytheism, creates his own make believe polytheism.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly seems to have his idea that, you know, the forces of order must be balanced with the forces of chaos, but he just doesn't have any good representatives available to him of the forces of order.
No, there was
He doesn't know the gods.
no, he very much he painted, and this is kind of a little bit of a conception about the Cthulhu mythos, and in insofar as that the old ones, right, these entities that come from outer space, that they are indeed entities of chaos, right? They're not necessarily entities of chaos. They are just entities that are bound within nature. They are part of nature itself, and in some of them, they are outside of nature as we understand nature. So pretty much what he's painting here, and this is what's really scary, is that a lot of these entities, they're not malicious. They're not here to because they hate man. They just they just don't care that we exist. They're so vast and so old and so beyond the human mind, is that it's like you know, us interacting with like an ant, right? We step on ants all the time. We don't even notice that they're there. And if we see them, like, oh wow, look at this little tiny bug here. And it's just like, and then you get tired of it and you squish it between your fingers and flick it and forget about it in 3 seconds. That's kind of like how he painted the entities. Not so much that they are uh chaos, but that they are parts of nature that are so above us that they could just step on us, because humanity. This is another thing. Lovecraft attacked the human's ego, right? He attacked man's ego in that man believes in this human-centric existence, when in reality, he said, "Well, you think that you guys are the center of the universe. Well, let me tell you something. You are nothing more than a grain of sand in a vast, endless sea, and that which exists above you in the food chain, in the hierarchy of existence in the natural world, is something that you couldn't even begin to try to deal with." You know what I mean? That's what was so scary about him, and that not that it's not like a demon, like you watch some sort of movie about an exorcist, or like, something like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist or something like that. These demons that come from this other dimension, and they're malicious and they hate mankind and they like toying with us and doing all this stuff. Whereas the entities of the Cthulhu mythos don't so much as, I mean, some of them do, like Nyarlathotep, he does, but Cthulhu, for example, he's like he is who the dead Cthulhu lies dreaming, right? He's not even trying to mess with mankind. The power that he exudes bleeds into the dreams of man and drives them mad and turns them into
Yeah,
cultists, right?
exactly. And it's just sort of like the scariest thing about chaos is it doesn't try to be chaos. Doesn't go around with a logic, trying to do things or caring about what happens.
It's just their nature, like the Jotun.
Yeah,
Just
and
is.
how those who came closest to wake him up did it accidentally, and not the cults that had tried it for thousands of years. Definitely an interesting point. When the primordial powers just takes hold of you, and stuff seems to happen outside of your control, but when you try to control it, either goes wrong or it doesn't work, which is a very interesting concept to me.
Yeah, I love it. It's like
Mm,
it's so different than, because when you grow up watching horror stuff and you get into horror, it's like jump scares, right? Jump scares and gore and like all this kind of Lovecraft, and those who write in that genre of cosmic horror, you have this slow, creeping, crawling story that just slowly
yeah.
unfurls, and at the end, it's like something so horrific, and it's not over when you put the book down. You put the book down and you're just left staring at the ceiling like, "Oh my god, what did I just read?" It just like never goes away. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So it was just brilliant.
absolutely.
I have to say though, you read enough Lovecraft, you do eventually get the so horrific, can't even describe it. Listen while I describe it. Meme.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
almost starting to beg for a safe space or something if you listen for too long.
dear. Um. So, I think I want to talk about in Lovecraft. I guess is ancestral callings
Mhm.
and ancestral memory. Um. I mean, we have a lot of people meeting family destinies. Um.
Yeah.
And in one story I listened to recently, the case of Dexter Ward,
Yup.
we actually have ancestor possession.
Yup.
In fact,
Yup.
reincarnation.
Reincarnation and lineage was such an important part of Lovecraft's
Yeah,
worldview. He very much viewed this idea of you are your ancestors. Even if there's an ancestral curse, you can't escape it. And if you do, you did so at your own peril, right? I just listened to The Alchemist by H.P. Lovecraft, and it's the same kind of story. It's this guy that his family, every man in his family dies at 32 on the dot because of some ancient thing that happened with the sorcerer, and it's in so many different stories. It's just this idea of ancestral memory, of lineage, of luck, right? As we as heathens would understand Hamingya, right? This idea of
Mhm.
essence or this a curse or a blessing being passed down from father to son throughout all of the ages is something that Lovecraft was big on, and not
Yeah,
just but you like you said, ancestral memory, luck, your fate, all of these things. He very much understood this primordial idea of inherited fate.
absolutely, he did. And something I notice is that people can't, resist the calls of their blood and what their blood compels them to do. For example, in another short story called The Festival, a man has been instinctually called back to do his ancestral ceremonies for the winter solstice in a particular town.
Yep.
And, he's got the ancestry of these people that Lovecraft keeps bringing up in his stories again and again. These sort of half fish, uh, Polynesian type people. And one of his books, can't remember which one, but it ends with the protagonist who's been sort of trying to fight his fish person ancestry all the way through, basically embracing it at the end. He sort of wrestled with the badness in him and lost. And he makes this big speech about how he's going to go down to Rillier and
I
hang
believe you're
around with
talking
fish.
about Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I believe it was Shadow of the Innsmouth. Yeah, because he makes the big window escape.
It's like
And then he can't stop thinking about the instant. Yeah, that was at the end of Shadow of the Innsmouth, yeah.
yeah, it's about the investigator. He goes to Innsmouth, and the people are kind of weird or whatever. They're like really like off. Like it got weird. They got like gills on their neck and like all this stuff. And he's like, he interacts with them, and they just don't want him there. He's like, "Be on your way, outsider. We look like strangers meddling in the affairs of the esoteric order of Dagon." You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then he eventually comes to this scene where the fish people come at him, and he's like, "Oh no, my god!" Blah, blah, blah," and he
And he's running.
falls over, and he wakes up, and he's like, "They're gone."
He's in the railway pass and he sees
That's it.
the horrific things that can barely be described.
Exactly,
The
exactly.
horrific noises, always the noises are horrific. The
And then he's
flopping,
yeah,
the flapping,
that's it. I love
squelching.
that too. I love even the sounds and the smells are indescribable for Lovecraft. But these fish people, they don't hurt him. And he's like, "Why didn't they hurt me?" And then he comes to the conclusion that he's got this ancestral line of fish he is a fish person, and he's being called back here to transform back into a fish person, and it makes him nuts, and he ends up in a mental
Yeah.
asylum, and like, oh, it's so good. I love it.
And he's like, by the end of it, he's just like, I embrace this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go down to Rillier. I'm gonna have a great time in the corals with Cthulhu.
Yeah. Yeah, time to go join the
Because
deep ones, my boys.
that's his blood. That's what he ends up wanting to do, which I guess is Lovecraft being rather reactionary as well,
Yeah.
as in the tribe that you are will
Yeah.
out.
It's also he's also talking about how can I say this without being too edgy on your YouTube? Um People blending, right? It's like Shadow or Innsmouth is
Yes,
like a warning against hybridization.
yes, that sort of thing, which is definitely an opinion that Lovecraft does hold.
Oh yeah.
It could be taken as a metaphor for inner evil as well, if you wanted it to. But yeah, it's definitely an opinion there that Lovecraft is warning against that. Um, yeah, but I think in general, like um, just there's this knowledge that this innate ancestral knowledge of the enemies of humanity as well. Like people always get a bad sense around anything even remotely connected to the great old ones. And
Well,
people have the instinctive dislike of the Innsmouth people.
Oh yeah,
as well.
there's definitely warnings of the out group, right? There's always this recurring
Yes.
theme of in-group preference.
You can't have Lovecraft without the other.
No.
You can't go around, trying to say that it doesn't have anything to do with that, which people who are non-reactionary and Lovecraft apologetics must have one heck of a time.
Yeah, well, both of these authors, Lovecraft and Howard, are completely incompatible with liberals. You cannot be a
Mm,
liberal and not go through some sort of yes, some sort of existential crisis reading their stories because it flies in the
exactly.
face of everything that liberals presuppose. It's
Well,
completely woven into all of their plots.
I recently figured out that liberals have literally no justification for not liking the fish people. They don't have any justification for it because here these beings, they're intelligent. They can reason like humans. They can communicate. They've got advanced technology. There you go. They'd enrich the culture. Why reject the fish? But why
Yeah.
why discriminate against Cthulhu?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's like where they end up in this conundrum where they sort of have to be vegans after a point. If they go really progressive, have to be vegans because they've backed themselves into a corner where it's like, well, what makes man different from animals? Intelligence? No, don't be silly. That's discriminatory against learning disabled people. And they go through all their list of what's supposed to make man any different, and then they sort of get stuck, and it ends up with man being on exactly the same level as animal.
Yeah. I could definitely see.
Yeah, so quite a lot of them then um, are sort of now delving into the concept of speciesism and how it links to colonialism and racism and intersectional justice. So I figure that if aliens did turn up, all they'd have to do was say that they were escaping interplanetary war or something, and you would get people out with signs saying aliens welcome.
Yeah.
I'm not even
Basically.
sure they would have to do that. They could just show up and, oh, strangers, welcome. Let's prioritize these. The mental wormholes they manage to squeeze themselves through is it's just mind-boggling. Yeah.
Absolutely. People are asking about the Bizarre Archives and sort of, I guess, where it comes into this
Sure.
tradition.
So, the Bizarre Archives, Weird Tales of Monsters, Magic, and Machines is um, it's a, it's like it's a compilation of short stories from aspiring pulp fiction, weird fiction authors, many of whom are actually from the UK. A lot of them are actually fans of your guys' show and members of the Bard community and so on and so forth. So it's like a joint effort between Americans and Brits, which is actually really it's really interesting and it's pretty exciting and I've really enjoyed
Mm.
hanging out with a lot of these folks and being an American, be growing up American, we get like these stereotypes of British culture. Like when if you go to an average American, you say, what are British people? They say they picture somebody with a monocle that sips tea and
Well, yeah, speaking as a British person, we grow up with those stereotypes too. We grow up with a distorted, modern idea of what British is and have to relearn it. Um, we don't actually get to hear about that much about our island's history pre-colonial times. So, sort of, it's a process for us as well of getting to understand what that is and connect with the really deep roots of it. But you were saying,
Yeah. So it's like, getting this stereotype growing up. I knew it wasn't quite all the way there because, you see on TV, you got, the football culture over there, and you got like tough guys and all that. But it was like really cool actually experiencing and getting to know British guys that live in the UK that are like just like me. That like all the same stuff I do. And I'm not saying they weren't there, but to like interact with it and to befriend these people is like it's just really really interesting and a lot of fun. So it's been really really cool learning more about kind of the regional cultures of British people, whether they be Scots or Geordies or some of the folks from the South, and how these people have you have your own different regional foods and slangs and dialects, and it's just been a really cool experience getting to know my British homies and all this kind of all the bizarre kings that tribute and all that stuff. But the Bizarre Archives is a compilation of aspiring uh, pulp authors from America and the UK, and it features stuff in all of the genres of weird fiction and pulp fiction, which is sword and sorcery, science fiction, cosmic horror, whatever kind of stuff you could think of, it's in there. We have our issue 1 is available. You can go to thebizarrearchives.com and pick up a copy for $13. It's over on Amazon and Books A Million. It is, I believe we have 15 stories in that one, and it's just all over the place, different stories. We have gothic horror. We have stories, straight up science fiction. We've got cosmic horror, supernatural horror. There's all kinds of stuff, fantasy, you name it, it's in there. And our issue 2 is going to be coming out very very soon, probably in December. We have another work, a cosmic horror double feature, which is coming out. Man, we got all kinds of stuff in the pipeline. We have um, an epic fantasy series. It's going to be what's it, an octology, I guess you could call it, whatever. 8 books, but the first one is going to be dropped. It's by our author M.S. Jones, which you guys are probably familiar with. He's a very prolific English guy, and he's going to be dropping his debut novel
Yes.
series called Chronicles of Heraldria, and the first book is called The Sacred Times Part 1. The guy's brilliant. Like all of these writers they're just so tremendous. I'm so blessed to have so many great guys working with us. And the Bizarre Archives it is a crusade against woke, paused, degenerate fiction. We are taking fiction back by force, and we are writing awesome based legitimate stories in the weird fiction tradition. We want to revitalize this art
Mm.
form because it is a folk art to us. It is a folk art that deserves to be in the hearts and minds of the people, and it's not galaxy brained uh, political philosophical analysis or anything like that. It is awesome storytelling for the sake of awesome storytelling. It's exciting, it's spooky, it's heartfelt at times. It's a complete appeal to the common man as the original pulp magazines once were.
yeah,
It doesn't matter if you're a major if you're like have a master's degree in English, or if you're a welder or a bricklayer, you can pick up the Bizarre Archives and you can enjoy it.
Yeah, and for anyone who wants to have a little peep, we do have an excerpt from the first issue on our channel, Baby Teeth, read by Hireth. A very good reading, I might add. So for anyone interested, go check that out and definitely get these compilations of stories. A few years ago, I came across Comicsgate with comic book artists basically rebelling against the woke system, and I definitely liked that. So even though they, as far as I know, they mainly keep to the liberal political aspect and everything. So it's really good to see some of our folk doing something similar, I think. And I definitely think it will be a good success.
Yeah, we're very, very blessed in our very first issue. Blew out all of our milestones in the first month. It was incredible. We've I think our milestone for the year, we quadrupled it in the first
Wow.
month. So yeah, we
Wow,
really,
indeed,
really
yes.
did very, very well, and we've been very well received and embraced by so many great people in our community and elsewhere that just
I
are just
mean,
they're just hungry and thirsty for some cool, just like cool storytelling for the sake of storytelling.
it's
No,
great stuff, yeah.
yeah,
I
so
think the reason why people are so thirsty for that is something you elaborated upon in your, problem with modern storytelling stream on the blog, and it's that the modern storytelling, it lacks the archetypes.
yeah,
It lacks the archetypes that ring true. Like you were talking about this feminist cruelty-free fiction, where the whole sort of idea of it was some woman just persuading a man that he's bad, and that was the entirety of the story. That doesn't actually achieve any eternal truth. It doesn't actually achieve any journey or catharsis or anything like that.
Yeah.
And when you read the stories in the Bizarre Archives, it's such a contrast because, they're speaking to things which you can demonstrably see are going wrong in our time. Like the one that Hyris read on our channel, Baby Teeth.
mhm,
I would fully suggest you get Bizarre Archives one, you have a look at that, and it's full because the build up to that bit that Hyris reads, just scathing critique of the banalities of sort of modern life and what it does to people.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So much modern literature is basically just political points. I have told this story before. I was reading a crime novel a few years back, and I had read one book by the same author previously and quite liked it. And this new book was dealing with some domestic abuse, and the male protagonist, who is a police detective, the line was something like the name of the guy and his male colleagues all hung their heads in shame over their sex, and it just completely took me out of the story. I forced myself to finish the book, but I could never get back into it. It just it really disgusted me. And I've had so many experiences like that over the last few years. So not only did I give up television and movies, which I really liked back in the day, but also my beloved books. So yeah, it's good to see some new stories which doesn't include that come out, and it's definitely on my wish list.
Katrina, you said you got a copy, right?
Yes, I do have a copy of the Bizarre Archives
Have you had a
1.
chance to read it?
Yes, I read all of it.
Really?
Yeah, I did. Um, because I sort of definitely wanted to read it over Halloween. It was very appropriate reading material for that. And so I read it, and I enjoyed particularly, there was a story where a guy is facing off with this talking like troll that's turned into stone.
Atlas Folly.
Yeah, I
Yep,
liked that one.
that was a great story.
Um, I think the twist at the end pretty good there. And then I read one which is obviously going to be continued in Bizarre Archives 2, where in there were these like morally reprehensible, fundamentally like liberal characters. You weren't supposed to empathize with them, I don't think. Um, and they were off out, basically being a story from the bad guy's perspective. It's like powerful lesbian witch
Oh, you're
type
talking.
person,
Oh, yeah, you're talking.
and this,
AFDM, a future darkly magical. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He's got these like kooky scumbag like, characters
yeah,
in there, and they're just like a lot of folks didn't quite. They're like they thought we were endorsing that or something. They didn't quite understand that it was like a mockery. But I
yeah.
read. I thought it was hilarious because it's like you got this.
It's sort of like a parody of the power fantasies that they want to write themselves,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
are true power fantasies. What they want to write, they project everybody else. They project the word power fantasy onto everything else, but in truth, they're writing them. And this is just like the story every liberal wants to read and sees no irony in it.
yeah, yeah. I thought that
Thought
story
that
was
was clever.
hilarious, and I actually really like that story because it's it does. He puts together, and I think he has like these goofy year like there's like he's got the he like purposely screws all the years up. He talks about there's how they hate this president D Rump or something like that, and they're just like scumbags, right? They're the one guy. He's just like a
But then
pothead.
they're talking about it like the main guy in the story hasn't stopped this and that. He hasn't stopped the nerve replacement trade. He hasn't stopped this and this and that, but it won't stop this lesbian witch just having her meltdown.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
It's def
in spite of the fact that everything's still going their way.
It's I'm excited to see where he goes with it. I hope they blow up and die or something.
Yeah.
It's like one of those stories you're like, you I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where he goes with that. He's actually coming back in Bizarre Archives 3. AFDM is not going to be continued in Bizarre Archives 2. The stuff that will be continued
Okay.
will be you had the Curioth of Drewbury Moor, which was the first story in issue 1. That's going to be continued. You're going to see those characters again. You're going to see, let me think, who else? Lucius Lex, which you saw. It's my story of Lex and the Lost Girl. You're going to see him come back in 2 stories. He's going to have 2 stories in issue 2, which is going to be Lex in the Odd Village and Lex in the Horror of Burnwick Hollows. So he's coming back. Who else? There's a couple that are going to be most of the authors that you saw there in issue 1 are going to come back for issue 2, plus some new ones. So you're going to see
Nice.
Robert Booth. He's coming back. MS Jones is coming back for issue 2. Not only is he coming back, he's featured on the cover of Biz Archives 2 with his story, The Dune Lord's
Ooh,
Dreaming. Yeah, so he's coming back. Um, uh,
Dune Lords.
yeah, it's a really good story, magnificent story. Our buddy A. Cuthbertson, who wrote Tanner's Gold, that was a big favorite for a lot of people. He's coming back. He's introducing his character, uh, Count Coralor, in what's the story called? It's called the Carnanways Crypt or something like that. And this character is really cool. It's a really offbeat kind of protagonist, anti-hero. He's sort of a good guy necromancer, and he has this kind of uh dark there's like kind of like dark humor in it a little bit, and it's a really good character, really good story. So he's coming back with that. There's a lot of stuff coming. Yeah, issue 2 is not only gonna really blow people away with the stories that are in there, it's also going to feature interior art from Donald Kent. So there's gonna be art in the book too for every story.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah, he is certainly a talented artist.
Excellent.
Yeah. I think we're coming up to about the time to wrap things up. It's been a really good discussion. Any
Been
thoughts,
wonderful.
Links?
No, just agree. It's been a very good conversation with Dave, and it's been a pleasure to have you on. Definitely hope to talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure coming on. Thank you so much, ladies, for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft could both had their own 2-hour streams analyzing various things about them and things in their work.
Yeah.
They're very interesting pair of dudes with an interesting friendship between each other
Big time.
as well, if turbulent. And I ought to read actually more of the correspondence that passed between them, because you do notice where you've got the Conan sword and sorcery side of Howard's work, and then there's sort of his almost attempt to do an impression of Lovecraft.
They actually both wrote stories in each other's universes.
Oh, so Lovecraft wrote in Howard's universe too.
Yep.
That's interesting. I haven't come across any of them. I'll need to give that a look. But yeah, it certainly has been a wonderful discussion, and the Bizarchives definitely a project taking Pulp Fiction forward in the spirit that it was originally conceived in.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure doing it, and I've been just so blessed with this, man. I just can't believe I get feedback almost every day. Guys that picked up the book and they're excited about it, and I guess a lot of people, they never heard of Pulp Fiction, they never heard of weird fiction. So this is like a whole new world with a lot of people, and they didn't know that they had this awesome based like literary tradition that has been, and it's not just for America was kind of the the like the epicenter of it, but there were plenty of pulp authors from England and Australia and all over the Anglosphere. It even like eventually made its way over to France, which where it's like still going today. I haven't read anything because I don't speak French, but they do a really great job with like the art, and they have a lot of indie projects over there. So you folks out there that are just coming into this, man, don't get discouraged by the pause and the garbage that's in Hollyweird and coming out of these mainstream publishers. Indie publishers are crushing it, man. There's so many good indie publishers out there, not just the Bizarre Archives. There's so many other ones out there. So support indie publishing, support based publishing. Get yourself a copy.
Yes.
Get yourself a copy from anybody else. It's just keep it going. Check out what's going on now, and most importantly, go back and look up these guys like Lovecraft and Howard. Man, I know everybody listening here loves Tolkien. There are so many other great storytellers that were in Tolkien's era. Go check them out. I implore you. Go look up Weird Tales magazine. Go look up Astonishing Stories, Amazing Stories, Argosy. Go read H.G. Wells. Dude, there's an entire absolute like multiverse of just brilliant, imaginative storytelling that could take an entire lifetime to read and get into. And you wouldn't even ever have to touch any of this garbage, corny, paused new age garbage.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
definitely use YouTube as a source for audiobooks, mainly looking for older titles. I did come across one version of Poe stories, narrated by Christopher Lee, which is very interesting. Yeah,
Really?
he was definitely an interesting man.
Yeah. So
We can definitely drop some links to good audiobooks.
yeah, there's a channel I really like called Horror Babble.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they have an entire playlist of Weird Tales short stories that are just
They
tremendous.
do.
They do a really good job.
Yeah, I listened to them a lot
I
last
like them.
week. So definitely one for the bookmarks.
I saw a couple of other channels put disclaimers in front of Howard or something. Language that may offend.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's gonna offend, all right.
Yeah. So if folks are like new to this, you can go check out on YouTube. If you want to listen to some audiobooks, I highly suggest if you're just getting into to Lovecraft, um, obviously Call of Cthulhu, Shadow over Innsmouth. Those are great starters.
Mm.
Yeah, for Robert E. Howard, Tower of the Elephant, Devil in Iron, Queen of the Black Coast. They're great stories. Some other good ones to check out. Donald Wandre, I believe his name was. He was a really cool writer. He had a book called, or he had a story called The Tree Men of something or other. It's about these like South African like Boer type guys, and they go come across this like weird ancient African entity. You got to check that story. It's a really cool story. Frank
Nice.
Belknap Long, David H. Keller. There's just the list is just so long of how many great authors were in this genre.
Absolutely. And it certainly has been a pleasure to chat to you about arguably the two greatest, really undisputed, the two greatest.
Yeah.
We could certainly uh, chat about them again at some point. That would be a great discussion to be able to have in the future because there's so much more to thematically dig into in their work. But yeah, for now, we shall say good night
Yes, and we will be.
from our perspective.
Yeah, we will be back next Sunday for our regular show. So I hope everyone has a wonderful Sunday and a wonderful week until then, and see you next time.
Yes. So do stay tuned about information for future shows. We're sort of deciding what we're going to do over the December and Christmas, Yule period. So yeah, just keep an eye on the channels, watch the live panels, and we should be with you with some information pretty soon about those things.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's it for.
It's been an excellent.
Oh, definitely. That's it for tonight. So good night, everyone.
Good night.